Okay, for Express and 5 students, okay, you have already learned the structures of alkanes and alkenes, the formulas and also their names. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the physical properties. When we talk about physical properties, we actually mean a few things. Okay, so you need to know the difference between physical properties and chemical properties. For physical properties, I'm actually talking about mainly melting point and boiling point. I'm talking about density. I'm talking about heat conductivity or electrical conductivity. So basically, there are no reactions involved. So these are what we call physical properties. Okay, so if you go back to your alkanes and alkenes, okay, so the physical properties are actually in the last column of your tables. Okay, so you should have the same table for alkanes, alkenes, alcohols, and carboxylic acid in your notes. For NA students, you only learn alkanes and alkenes. Okay, so for physical properties, right, it has something to do with the sheer size of the molecule. Okay, the sheer size of the molecule. So as you actually go down the group, you realize that the number of carbon and hydrogen atoms actually increases. The structure gets longer and longer and longer. Okay, so this will actually lead to some of the physical properties that we are actually having. If you actually notice this particular column on melting point and boiling point, you can also see that as you go down the group, you will see that it starts to increase. Okay, the numbers get bigger. So this actually explains the very first physical property is that as we go down the group, the melting and boiling point increases. Now, what's the reason why? Okay, you don't really need to know how to explain this during exams, but it's just really important for you to make a hypothesis. So it has something to do with the sheer size of the molecule, because as you go down the group, there are more carbon and more hydrogen atoms. So because of that, there are more attractive forces. So when there are more attractive forces, it requires more energy to overcome it. That's why the melting and boiling point increase down the group. Okay, so I repeat, it had something to do with the size of the molecule, which leads to more attractive forces. Therefore, you need more energy to overcome it. Okay, now let's go on to the second property. So second property is actually more viscous. More viscous simply means the ability to flow. So I give you a very clear example. For example, there are three types of liquids: water, oil, and honey. So out of the three, right, based on your general knowledge, you know that water is the easiest to flow, then honey is the more difficult to flow, then oil is actually somewhere in between. So this is actually viscosity. As the molecule gets bigger and bigger down the group, first one, which is methane, is the one that flows the easiest. Okay, so it flows easily as compared to hexane. So as I go down the group, this is actually less viscous, and this is actually more viscous. Okay, so it's just the ability to flow. And obviously, based on the size, it has something to do with flammability. So flammability is about burning. So for example, alcohol burn very easily, then water not so. Alcohol is much easier to burn, so that's flammability. So between just based on the size, the smaller I am, it's very easy for me to burn. It's like burning a very small piece of paper versus burning a very huge piece of paper. Of course, the smaller piece of paper is easier to burn. So I call this more flammable. Okay, so methane being the smallest in size, this is actually most flammable as compared to hexane. So it actually goes, as you go down the group, it gets less and less flammable. Okay, you can also look at density, because there's one last column that I didn't really look at, which is the state at room temperature. You can see that as I go down the group, I get heavier and heavier and heavier. My density actually increases. So the first four in your syllabus, This first four is actually gases. So you can see that they are gases, followed by the liquid and the liquid for pentane and hexane. Okay, so if you refer to your alkenes page, okay, which is somewhere, okay, different syllabus have different pages, so you just refer to the same page. You notice the similar physical trends on the very last column. So this is really something for you to note. You can also see that the density increases. The first three is gases, they are gases. The last two, they are actually liquids. Okay, so this is really something for you to know. So for the 4NA students, this is where your syllabus stop. Okay, whereas for the 5NA or 4 Express students, maybe for your information, just for liquids and acids, what are some changes as compared to alkenes? The most obvious change is the state. Okay, for alcohols, they are all in the liquid state. This also applies similarly for acid, because the definition of acid is they must dissolve in water to produce H plus ions. So they are mainly in the liquid or aqueous states. So slightly different from alkenes, where they are alkanes and alkenes that exist in the gaseous state. Okay, so that's one thing for you to note. Other than that, these are all the physical properties that we mainly talk about. Melting point, boiling point. Actually, melting and boiling is the same point. So if they ask you, can you list down two properties, you cannot state melting and boiling as two separate points. They are actually one similar point. Okay, so melting, boiling, viscosity, flammability, and most importantly, the states. So these are the 4 physical properties that you need to memorize and you need to take note. Okay, with that, I will end this part of the lesson.